now that you mentioned that, one of the things I know we can do, because it comes as a dry product, is you can actually take them. The method I have, I squeeze them out, I weigh it in the tray. So it's the same every time. 2,900 grams for a cube in every other slot, just in case you're wondering. but it's the type of thing where, just like you said, I can cut my clones, I can weigh that tray, and then every day after that, I can weigh it, and I will know exactly how much water I've lost. So
it's funny
really
because
predictable.
We're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, true OGs, masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5e, and as always available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. And where do we go for the samples?
We can just go right to the same place, but jugdealers.net/samples. We do have a growers form to fill out for you guys to give us a little bit better idea of your garden. And then we've got 3 different packages that are available. So obviously we've had a bunch of people that have been requesting stuff, so keep that up. But we also want to make a special mention on for any of those commercial cultivators. We are putting an extra tab out there that's going to be more commercially driven, because obviously that those are really small sample packages for the individual grower, but we've had more and more commercial people hitting us up, and we want to let you know we don't want to leave you guys out.
And they can reach out in the comments too.
They can definitely, anybody can reach out in the comments for that matter. So if you do have a commercial grow, at least for now, until we have a commercial tab, just reach out in the comment, section. We're happy to come on site. We also do have a bookings tab that's on there too. So if you do want us to come by the grow, you want us to come by an event, a cup, something like that, even a grow store. Also, as our calendars get filled up, especially in the summer season, you'll see more and more stuff that's popping up on that page as well. Trying to give you guys an idea of where we'll be out and about, not only in the country, but also around the world, as we tend to get out and about with that as well. So
you got South Africa in October.
Yes, that is the plan. That got announced. The dates got announced for that South Africa trip. I want to say it's I don't know the exact dates, but sometime October for sure. Quick Buy and Grow and Jack Imports and the SA Green Cup. Shout out to all you guys. And that's definitely going to be super stoked to go back to that. And I also just got back, which we won't get into it at all right now, but I just got back from my Grand Canyon hike. I know we had talked a decent amount about that coming up to it. There was a lot going on, and we'll put some pictures up and whatnot later. But man, I'm really actually excited to dive right into this one. Gabe did a wonderful job putting this together. We get asked a lot of different questions about whether it's different hydro techniques or, different substrates against each other or, what's better, different substrates. I mean, it's like we constantly get these kind of tech questions, and we kind of tried to put an episode together, which squashed a lot of these things in one. And we kind of got down to, hey, let's really talk about 6 very specific cultivation methods and dive into each of them, rather than going, hey, let's try and touch on everything that's out there. We'd be here for multiple episodes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different, everybody's got their special thing in a lot of places. We kind of honed in on the 6 that we really feel applicable to most of our listeners. Obviously, there's going to be the outside guy who does aeroponics or aquaponics or some other ponics.
What I mean? There's a lot. And kudos to all those people.
No, 100%, but basically, as usual, we've kind of broken down the history. We've broken down the pros and the cons of the things that we like to see, but we focused on hydroponics, going rock wool, going deep water culture, going NFT, and then also talking about Coco Core, which is one of our favorites.
Right.
The peat-based mixes, which we've definitely used in the past, and that's one of the things I started out on.
Yeah, exactly. I was literally going to say, you took the words out of my head.
For us, it was, the genesis. And I'll be honest with you, back when I was in my early 20s, I was doing, I don't even know the term living soil had really been coined yet.
I don't think so.
That was like the mid kind of early 90s. But that was how I started. And like I've said to a lot of folks on the show, it's a challenge because different if you're using chicken manure or some type of other manure, they release, different elements at different times.
Well,
so
I'm
you really got to
thinking
know your,
you got to know your poo. You got to know your shit, but I was even thinking how, like, of course the term didn't exist, Gabe, because that's what everybody was doing. So there wasn't enough other things to even need a term for it. It's
and there
what else are you growing it?
There weren't as many grow stores. There was no internet. You were reading books.
You went to the nursery, typically a lot before a hydro store. There wasn't indoor gardening stores. You'd go down to the local nursery and get some type of manure, or a mushroom compost or something like that, or really, and we'll talk about this later, your Pro Mix, your Sun 4, I remember, up there,
Pro Mix HP. I don't even think HP existed.
No, the HP. No, that was New Age. Come on, man. That was New Age. But even, at the spot up there, in LaPorte, I remember back in the day, it was like, man, that's where you got your Sun 4. They always had the good, they always had the good price on it because it was a nursery. They bought it by the container. But these are things like we didn't know yet. So again, we really did focus on the ones that we feel like are most applicable to our listeners and what we see most commonly today, both in commercial and in home grow production, with our lovely C3 photo periodic.
Honestly, a lot of that is based on the feedback we get. You guys think you're just filling out a grower's form. We do go through those things. We do look at them, and a lot of what we picked is based on some of the feedback we get from you guys, as far as you're saying, hey, I'm using this, I'm using that.
And even click on the growers form there, Graham. But why don't you just show them? You can see this is basic stuff. How much, what lighting are you using? How many gallons a week are you using? What are you looking to try? Is there any notes you'd like to tell us? It's really just trying to give us a very basic understanding of what you're doing. It's important for us to know whether you're using RO water or not, things like that. So your source water, what your ppm is of it, pH. So, again, we don't get too technical, but these things do really help us help you. But back to the episode. At the end of the day, we're really looking at these 6 popular growing systems, which are going to be, essentially hydroponics, rock wool, deep water culture, coco core, peat-based mixes, and as Gabe said, living soil, which is funny because we think of that as a normal term now, but that was the only term. What are you growing
back in the day? It was dirt.
Dirt, bro.
And hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll have a better understanding of some of these systems, and you'll be able to say, hey, this is something I want to try. This is something I want to get more familiar with. And really, as always, we're kind of pushing you to go down whatever rabbit holes. Real quick before we get started.
Yes, sir.
Let's do a couple shout outs.
Yeah. And I do want to say this will apply to you, whether you're in a tent, whether you're in a greenhouse, whether you're outdoor. Really, we kind of wanted to do a little bit.
It's that time of year.
For everybody. It's that time of year.
Yep.
Make sure you're getting your veggies in the ground too, folks.
That's right. You've had yours in for a while now.
Yes, I have. I get aggressive.
I commend you for being that brave here because, as most of us know in Colorado, you really shouldn't put anything outside till Mother's Day.
Oh, definitely not.
But
hey,
you're coming up roses.
Hey, look, I'm going to have by this weekend, I will have, by the time the show drops, in fact, I will be eating my own leaf lettuce right off the rip.
Nice.
So anyhow, get your shout outs in.
Quick shout outs, AHL in Albuquerque. I stopped down there. We actually went down there for Scietetics to see some Primus and some Maynard.
There we go.
Really awesome. But we did go into AHL. Those guys are jamming. They are the only show in town in Albuquerque.
You know what's funny?
So
it's because
good for those guys for
when I was there 20 years ago. Okay, little tidbit about AHL, which is Albuquerque Hydroponics and Lighting.
Yep.
For those of you who don't know, right off there off Catherine. See, I didn't have to look at the address, right?
You knew.
And why and how do I know that?
That's your town though.
That's my wife's from there. I still have family down there, and I did go to school down there. Shout out everyone's a Lobo.
Drops. You were actually down there for a wedding too.
Yes, exactly. You're right. Absolutely. Food's great, everything else, but that was also
awesome.
My very first grow store.
Scietetics.
Scietetics is great. It's hot. It's got some good.
Nick recommended me to Scietetics.
It's a good one.
The sopapilla could feed a family of 4.
I will say my favorite. Padillas. Padillas off Constitution.
I didn't even think to ask you where to go down
Small
there.
little family-owned place. My great uncle used to eat there back in the day. It's like one of those places like we don't need to be open a bunch of hours. They slam. It's all family-owned. Their green chili is amazing. In fact, it's one of the few places I actually get the red chili, so I always go Christmas.
Okay.
For those of you that know.
Christmas, red and green.
You red and green, baby? Come on now.
Damn, we getting the code up in here.
Oh, shoot. Again, by the time this drops, I will have had those Padillas. And get the Carno out of Auto. If it's Wednesdays, get the Carno out of Auto. Just so you know.
Who's our second shout out to? Because they just joined the squad.
Second shout out is to 77 Hydro in North Jersey, right?
Yep,
so I was going to say New Jersey, but then I love how you put the
North Jersey, not to be confused with South Jersey.
Look,
you know what I'm saying?
I don't know.
I'll be honest with you. The people in this part of Jersey don't even really know that South Jersey's a part.
They don't even know that
might as well be Philadelphia.
Who knew? But yeah, shout out to 77 Hydro. I know you've been going in there for a little while.
Yeah.
We've got you guys out there that are, you guys are out there requesting products. We're getting more and more retail shops that are reaching out to us. So please don't be afraid to walk into your local
real
hydro
ones
store.
that stuck around, the
ones that are there, man, have them get a hold of us. They can get a hold of us through the show. They can actually do the comments through the Jug Dealers website. However they need to get a hold of us, have them hit us up, or even tell you what, you give us a tip, we'll give them a call.
That's right.
So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Third shout out is to Jason. Jason, I actually saw at the Bar Terp Town that Adam Dunn had this weekend at his little studios.
Yeah.
They have a little trade and you can get all kinds of different things.
Hey, everybody. Didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but did want to remind you that anything we talk about that are our products, you can find at jugdealers.shop. 24/7 online. Go and get it. Support us. Help us continue doing what we're doing. Jugdealers.shop. Thanks a bunch. Now back to the show.
Down that Adam Dunn had this weekend at his little studios.
Yeah.
They have a little trade and you can get all kinds of different things.
Things and stuff?
Dude, things and stuff. They actually had the freak show, the freak show out there. If you've ever seen the freak show.
I have.
It is
South Africa.
Yeah, it's a wild looking plant. GRAMBO, I'll have to send you some.
Yeah, I saw it. They did send me some pictures. It looks like a palm frond.
Yeah, and then he puts it on with a dog collar and a leash, so it's freak on a leash. And he sells them just right there. Typical Adam. But I ran into Jason, and Jason had a question for us. I answered it, but I wanted you to answer it as well so that our listeners can actually listen to this, because I thought it was applicable with this episode in the living soil. So Jason's question was, he is harvesting in a bed, and next to those plants that he's harvesting, he has newer plants that he's not harvesting. They're not, I think they're either in the beginning of flower or they're in veg. And he was worried about the winter frost in the soil, how it would affect those other plants. Jayhawk, can we get your answer to this question? Because I feel like there's a lot of people who use living soil and winter frost, and they're kind of on the fence as to what it does. So help us out.
And of course, honestly, this is a great question. I'm happy we actually get to address this because I get it a lot, and I'm going to jump around here a little bit, but try not to. So first off, what I'd like to say is, winter frost does really affect the plant more than it affects the soil, right? And really, we like to call it, really more of a natural chelator, in that it's blocking out certain elements that actually trigger the plant and give it those positive stresses to trigger that senescence, which is the natural ripening process that we're looking for. But here's the thing: more and more people, even though it's not technically organic. I mean, if you look at it, it's literally about, 500 ppm. But it's like 500.5 EC, 250 ppm. It's
no
not really any
EC
food.
Though. That's the thing. It's no EC. Yeah. That's what I said to him. Is I was like, it's not really
it's not really food. It's triggering a response. So, and it breaks down on the soil very quickly. But in a bed situation, I also tell people, for a couple of reasons, water the plant and not the whole bed. And that's for a couple reasons. One, because again, it does break down on the soil so fast. If I water the whole bed, which a lot of people love to do once a week, one good watering, well, I'm really only getting one watering on winter frost. It's not going to keep drinking on that through the rest, of that week. It's really just going to end up will have broken down, and it's not going to be effective anymore. So knowing that it breaks down that fast, you can of course, be replanting right into it afterwards, without really any issues at all. But also it's just not, it's just not food. But I like people to get at least 3 waterings in with winter frost. So at least every other day for that second to last week, in kind of the traditional way that we've always advertised winter frost.
You're assuming that a living soil person is watering less than because with cocoa, I'm watering every day.
Of course, you don't have to worry about it with a guy that's doing cocoa in 2 or 3 gallons, even up to 5 gallons. But a guy that's in a big soil bed, so let's say maybe they're even a 15-gallon pot, a 25-gallon pot, or a full raised bed, let's say, right? A lot of times they're only watering maybe once a week, and really those plants have plenty of room to be able to have large root systems, you know, and those containers or whatever they're in hold a ton of water, right?
In which that root system is really an insurance policy.
Absolutely. You know, and that's why a lot of people
that's what we're going to dive into on this episode.
Right. And even if you think about like old school guerrilla growing, right, you're trying to go in there and soak that sucker once a week. You know what I mean? So like a lot of that comes from more kind of the old school mentality, but rest assured, you know, the people that are doing living soil and want to use winter frost, you know, you're not going to affect the microbes that are in there. You're not going to affect the other plants that go in there if you are reusing the substrate. And I will say, and the last thing I'll say, we have more and more living soil people using it, because how do you turn those microbes off at the end of that cycle, right? And so I've seen in a lot of situations where a plant's getting deep 8, 9, 10 weeks, and you see just barely a little bit of fade happening. You can't just shut it off.
I think that's what I struggled with the most back when I was learning.
I never had fade
in my early 20s because anything like a bone meal or anything like that,
bro, it's going to keep on giving.
Yeah, it really doesn't flush out of the plant. And, you know, then that's back before anybody gave a shit about white ash. But that's a whole other. We're talking the 90s. So everybody was just happy to have weed that even looked good.
Yeah. Weed even at all.
Yes.
Really.
But, you know, it's one of those things where, that was what I struggled with the most was, hey, how do I have something that is supposed to be, you know, available to the plant in 6 weeks? How do I turn that off at 7.5 weeks? Or how do I make sure I gave it at the right time in veg? Because ultimately that's really, I even remember being, because we did the grow off years ago, and I remember being in, you know, I was in like 30 different facilities in a short amount of time. And one of them was a living soil facility. They had pots, so they weren't super huge pots, so that they could try to mitigate the amount of food that was actually available to get a little bit of a crash at the end. But literally I go, so when are these things done? Looked about 5 weeks into me. He goes, oh man, we're harvesting tomorrow. Well,
green as could be.
It was funny with the grow off. You know, I competed in the grow off a couple of times, and it was always funny with the grow off because, you know, the plant you were growing, you were trying to make massive as well, because one of the categories was weight.
Yeah.
I came in, I think 5th one year, and I had 1,500 grams on this plant.
You thought you had something.
I thought I had something special. And the guys who came in like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, it was monumental.
Well, Jason, thank you for that living soil question. Again, we do get that a lot. Hopefully, you know, my answer, again, I knew I was going to jump around a little bit because it's so multifaceted for me, but hopefully that did answer your question. And definitely living soil people, you and Winter Frost should be very good friends.
Yes, sir.
Let's really dive into this. Again, you know, we're going anything from ancient methods, you know, which is really, you know, the beginning of that agriculture as far as just, you know, what the ground gives you, steward of the soil, you know what I mean? Really respecting the substrate that you're using as a renewable resource and something you're going to be reusing, all the way up to kind of, unfortunately, the grow and chuck mentality of Rockwell.
Well, it's funny because people think of hydroponics as cutting edge and pretty modern. But
no. Have you heard of Mesopotamia?
Yeah, the hanging gardens of Babylon. You know, you look at some of the rice fields that people have had for you know, literally thousands of years in Asia and stuff like that, and like that's all hydroponics.
Yes, Aztecs as well, right? Those are all the floating, like, I mean, all the, you know, Tenochtitlan, which I know I butchered that, but like a lot of that and a lot of, don't hurt me, people. That was a lot of that was done, you know, in marshes and on actual floating and movable, you know, they were growing on, you know, movable islands, if you will. And of course, you know, rice fields, all that. These are, so really even and it's funny because in Holland,
put the two words together: hydroponics. Water growth.
Goodness,
you know,
water growing, and
Holland. You make a great point.
Well, and really, let's be honest. What is hydroponics? It's growing with a lack of soil. So that can mean so many different things, and that's why all these things we're talking about and what's technically soil, right? Because like in Holland, the minute you take the natural soil out of the ground and even put something as basic as perlite in there, in their mind, that is now hydroponics. It's drained waste hydroponics to them because it's altering the soil in any sort of way. So to them, it's, and this is again, you know, I'm sure there's some people out there that don't directly believe this. So I'm not pointing at a whole culture, but you know, our friends, our good friends, you know, in Holland have always said, when you alter it all, like in our mind, like you are now very quickly getting into that hydroponic realm because it's not true soil anymore.
Well, and
it's a strict term.
It's not susceptible to some of I'm not saying it's It's not susceptible to its own problems.
Sure.
It's not susceptible to some of the pest pathogens issues that you see. That was one of the things that, that always amazed me with cocoa is just that you're not going to see some of the issues you see with soil. Why? Because it's an above ground product.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
These are different things. Can you move that up a bit there, Grambo? So the point is obviously, modern, and we have to draw a line somewhere. Modern. Anyway, you have to draw it somewhere, and I guess somewhat, subjectively, we picked the 1930s because that's kind of when some of these techniques start and some of these terms started really getting coined, right? Because even like you mentioned, like the hanging gardens, Babylon, a lot of these things, or rice paddies, stuff like that. I mean, a lot of it's the gravity fed type systems, or even using like clay earthenworks to do like buried pots and things like that. You got to think people also had to preserve food and things like that too. So really understanding even the process of like osmosis, which is the movement of water across the membrane, and using something like clay to move from high to low concentration. I mean, mind-blowing stuff, folks.
Even if
believe it or not, people could live thousands of years ago and not die.
And that's just it. Even if you look at what, when we were in Barcelona, with what the Romans did as far as moving water long distances, if you think about places like that, the Gorge up in George Washington, all these different places, these are places that are sunny and dry, but they figured out how to move water.
Well,
so it's a great place to
go. And even look at a place like Israel, right? In the Middle East, it's literally like the as far as irrigation tech, it's the best in the world, but they put a ton of time and effort into it for obvious reasons.
Yep.
They live in a harsh, desert place. But again, if you have that kind of quality of sun and can get water and nutrients, we're into something. So go figure. 1930s, California, Berkeley. No surprises there. That's kind of where it got its genesis.
Yeah.
And then, but really it got its kick in the ass in the 1990s
for cannabis.
For cannabis.
Yeah. Tomatoes and all kinds of other stuff. They're,
Yeah. I mean, and again, these hydroponics, as far as I would say, and specifically even like greenhouse tomatoes, greenhouse cucumbers, things like that, that by definition, I wonder when that really probably is popularized more in like the 50s, 60s.
Yeah. I would say in Holland, because from what we saw in Holland, I mean, those guys grow just acres upon acres of tomatoes, giant, huge, massive plants in these little
and nothing. In fact, it's all stem actually.
It was so funny to me too, because all of a sudden, everything that we've seen here in cannabis in the last, let's say 5-10 years, you're like, light bulb, you're like, ding, you're like, oh, now it all makes sense.
Well, and even like if you think about, and without going, super into it, but like the Paraquat Square and everything like the 1970s, people weren't looking to bring cannabis production indoors. That was not the goal. People were scared. They stopped buying the stuff that was coming from south of the border because, even as far as like talking to my, my pops and some of his people, like the stuff, the true Acapulco gold, stuff like that was coming across the border, right? It's like, bro, the Panama Red, whatever it was, like that was grown in large quantities in areas that people knew how to grow it. They were locally adapted strains that were coming up as soon as the U.S. government started going and really spraying the hell out of that. People got scared. And then they got scared that if they were going to do it there, then they would do it back home. So that's when people started bringing it indoors, which when people got hip to things like you got to even figure, marijuana botany, for example, right? That was 1981 when Robert Cannell Clark put that out, right? So people are just starting even to have any information whatsoever, like at all on specific cannabis production, which is no surprise why come the 1990s in California, people were putting it indoors, looking for that control, wanting to tinker with things, right? Probably half of it was just for fun.
Which, it's funny you say that because they just had the anniversary of the end. It's been 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War. And realistically, you know, a lot of soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War is what triggered people starting to grow a lot more cannabis here in the United States.
And a different, and then
more 6 years later,
genetics,
6 years later comes Connell Clark's book, the timeline really makes sense,
really lines up, doesn't it? And obviously, again, hydroponics encompasses so much because, again, anything that's a lack of soil is going to be technically hydroponics, whether it's a flood and drain, whether it's some type of recirculating system, whether it's a drain to waste.
Like I say to people, cocoa is passive hydro. hydro.
It's drained to waste. You're pouring it in there. It's not really soil. It acts as soil. It looks like soil.
dirt.
You know,
Smells like dirt.
It's kind of like, you know, it's like, well, it's like the food-like products that Michael Pollan says. He goes, looks like food, tastes like food, but it's not actually food, right? You know what I mean? So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it encompasses a bunch of different things.
Whether it's direct, whether it's passive, ebb and flow, nutrient film, DWC, the list goes on and on and on.
What are I mean, for our viewers, for our listeners, what are some of the pros as you see it? What are some of the cons as you see it when it comes to hydroponics?
Well, I think first and foremost, what people really saw was explosive growth.
Yeah.
That was
much quicker than you're seeing in the peat.
Absolutely. And you see that, for the record, in a cocoa situation too, as compared to a traditional soil situation. I remember that's one of the things that sold me on cocoa, right? But no, explosive growth. So growth and yield, even though I would venture to say that a lot of the yield I've seen from the classic hydro setups of the 90s, right? Which was that Dro.
Yeah.
Remember the Dro?
Yeah. I mean, I used to use
you guys remember, you know what I mean?
I used to use the Aqua Farms. You know, we were talking before we put this episode together about the ebb and flow tables.
Yeah.
If you remember the old 8x8.
Oh yeah. The Aqua Farm buckets, and then
I forget what it's even called, but you would have it kind of slightly off level, and it would have the little baskets with the hydro ton.
Sure.
I'll be honest with you.
Water farm buckets, I think is what those were called. Water farm buckets.
I was running we would actually buy the 3.5 gallon water farms and switch them into the 5 gallons.
Sure.
And I ran those for years and really successfully.
But these were also
so much fun.
There was also no substrate. They would for the size of the plant you could get and for the actual herb that you could get off it. But again, remember how the herb smoked like shit? It was airy. It was huge. It was overblown. So light green though, people loved it. Remember that? Remember that?
It was that lime green. It was that bright limey green.
Yeah. It was nice part, and it had nose, but you couldn't even smoke a whole bowl of it. It was just.
But if you had the reservoirs, you could go away for like 5-6 days.
Well, that's the thing. One, you could
leave them.
You could start doing more efficiently trap houses. Two, going back to your question about pros, efficient water use.
Yeah.
And so you could do it with very little water, and you didn't have to do a lot of substrate. So you weren't hucking in bales of peat moss or cocoa or soil into a rented house that you weren't supposed to be doing that in.
You're not wrong.
You know, a cleaner and general environment just because, you don't have all this soil around.
What I will say though is you always find those goddamn rocks. Like it could be years since you've operated in a house.
That's the herpes of the substrate world. Hydroton is the herpes of the substrate world.
Like, and you step on it and you're like, son of a.
It is just in the same way that glitter is the herpes of the craft world. You heard me, glitter. You heard me.
You know, glitter is brutal.
Another hydroton is the herpes of the substrate
pro
world.
that we didn't. Not another pro that we didn't list. Although we did put up that it is highly controllable for pH and EC.
Yeah.
One of the things that's
there it is.
One of the things that's actually nice about it as well is if you are having a freaking problem, you can flush the whole system.
You can go back and reset. You can reset
a lot easier than you can in some other
But I also
systems.
feel like if it goes haywire, it goes haywire so fast. And
I've saved some shit. I'm not going to lie.
No, I believe that.
You know,
but here's the other thing: you have no buffering capacity. So I would consider, interestingly enough, I put highly controllable pH as a pro and a con.
Right.
Yeah, I know that sounds weird a little bit, but I will say I totally agree with you, Gabe, that you can do a bit of a reset, which in soil resets are super tough because now you've waterlogged.
Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah.
You can get away with that more if you really want to do like a heavy ruby reset, like we will advise people to do. In cocoa, I'm much more comfortable with that. But and again, I think people love the tinkering aspect of it, but for all those reasons, it's in a clandestine place. You didn't want to be bringing crap in and out. You were already having to bring the herb out. It looks so lime green. People just loved it. The rappers were singing about it. It was Dro, baby.
That's exactly what it was the first of the rap culture influencing the cannabis game.
Remember the hats? They were just like mine. They just say Dro. Dro.
So that's
shout out to the Dro guys, by the way.
Yeah, you know what? Anyway, as far as what are your cons when it comes to it? I mean, that's what I would say we're my true pros, especially for some 90s.
It can be expensive
90s.
it can be expensive to set up. It does require some technical knowledge. You got to understand what the hell you're doing. System failures can be catastrophic. It's the type
pump
of thing.
goes.
Yeah, or you really got to make sure. I always say to guys in my gardens, every plant every day. If you have emitters to get clogged, anything like that, depending on, the first one we're going to talk about is going to be rock wool. Actually, when it comes to hydroponics, you have a clogged emitter on rock wool, there's a good chance you could lose that plant if you're in a 6-8-inch block. Whereas with cocoa, you could maybe walk out of that, skate out of it a little bit better. So.
Yeah. Now, here's what I will say. I like to use corn as an example, right? And use okay, so corn, if it gets one stripe of yellow on it, that's a documented crop loss. You could actually go and get crop insurance off of, right? And the only reason I mention that is because one little hiccup in an annual plant, you're going to be off your actual potential, right? And every day you're off of that. And certain things you might never be able to get back on course. That's why I always encourage people also take good notes. If something went wrong, if something went wrong, and I love your every plant every day, but I also like every plant every day that's white market. A lot of this stuff, I think about it like the pros and cons from like the original, hydro setups. It's like, this is black market shit. You weren't there every day. You know what I mean? But again, it's so funny. You and I can literally.
I'll be honest with you. Hey everybody, just want to remind you that if you want to try any of the products that you see us talking about or using in our own gardens, go to jugdealers.shop. And now back to the show.
You know what I mean? But again, it's so funny. You and I can literally.
I'll be honest with you. Even when I was black market, and even if I was out of town, I would still have someone place eyes on it, purely because it's always the day that you don't get eyes on it that something fucked up happens.
And and for our listeners out there, that is called Murphy's Law.
It's true. It's real. I've just seen it happen. Christmas, New Year's, July 4th, doesn't matter. Your dog's birthday, it really doesn't freaking matter. You know what? And shit always seems to happen on, when I don't
disagree with that, but I also look at that as that's more gray market. And what I mean by that
cameras help.
When it was true black market, we couldn't even have just a homie come by every day.
Don't disagree.
So it's interesting to look at black market. Yeah. Then there was that gray time. We didn't
have cameras back then either.
There were no cameras back then either. And there was that gray time where it's enough people are growing weed in Colorado. My buddy can come by and check the plants.
I was fortunate enough that I never came in on an issue with my reservoirs, and you could go if you had the double stack Texas,
but these are things that, and that's why I always like to have, more of I was always a hydro system for the last many years, but it was always one that had a little bit of a hybrid setup. So there was at least a day or two where stuff's not going to be dead. But even with that day or two, if it knocks off a little bit, almost good enough is really never good enough, at the end of the day. Now, the other thing I like to mention, and I'll say as a con, and this is for me, and I don't want to get taken to the cleaners on it, but I think that there's potentially a lack of terpene expression.
Yeah, I was going to discuss that as well, in which that's kind of one of the...
It's chemi herb.
Well, that's one of the...
herb.
I think that's one of the reasons you saw the cocoa become so popular.
That happy medium.
Because then you do have the ability, we talk about it, I'm not going to call anybody out, but there are certain people, and I think you and I are on the same page, where they're like,
do it.
If it's not organic, it's garbage, and F the people who use synthetics, blah 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 blah. I'm really kind of sick of that malarkey and that kind of bullshit, because the truth of the matter is, there's new millennium. I think one of the biggest reasons that I kind of switched to this camp when I did was that there's a reason that we can't label things organic. That's because they're not fully organic. But to say that they don't have a mix of organic and synthetic inputs, that's bullshit.
Well, and
the reality is, we call it all the time synganics. We didn't coin the term.
I did not coin.
We're not saying we coined the term, but we definitely use that term all the time. It. Where it is the type of thing we do embrace, because we're like, look, all the bioactivity that is happening in the soil, the episodes we've had about mycorrhiza and the rhizosphere and the rhizosheath, all that is such an important part of delivering a delicious product.
Well, and I had a conversation just with the guy this morning that I had given samples of, and he'd been really, really working hard on a pure salt line, getting that to work and really, diving heavy into the crop steering aspect and everything. And I ended up putting him on a NewMill schedule. And he just this morning came in, he's like, man, I don't know what it is. He's like, but like, it's definitely different. I said, well, that's because everybody's got the same 17. No chemist out there is going to like leave 2 out. You know what I mean? Like the 17 that we know, and as a chemist, as a blender, as a plant scientist, are going to give you, all 17 plant essential nutrients that we know of right now, right? It's what else? To me, it's always the what else. So for me, it's much more about the plant beneficial than it is the plant essential, because everybody has plant essential nutrients. Well, every one of them.
And again, the fulvic carbon, plants 45% carbon.
Well, and what is, and I'll leave you with this. What is organic or not organic? Is it carbon-based? Is it not carbon-based? Organic, not organic? That's really it from a chemistry standpoint. And I digress.
Dude, we're going to start.
Last but not least, who do you really think that this pure hydro is best for?
I mean, I think it's really better for the tech savvy guys. I think the guys
that can be there all the time.
Well,
but also that
if you can't be there all the time, you can spend the money on the monitoring equipment that will let you be
these
there
days,
all the time.
These days,
because nowadays there's enough sensors, there's enough of these things. But look, if you feel like putting the time in and spending the money, you can grow absolutely awesome crop. And again, it's one of the reasons you see commercial using it.
Well, I was going to say that's why when you talk about real horticulture, like we say, like not basement horticulture, not a knock on any of it, because I've seen delicious product in every situation imaginable.
Hand-watered pitchers are fine.
But if you're drawing that line in the sand, and you're really talking about, real horticultural production, there's a reason that it's used commercially. Yep. The fact that it is clean, the fact that it is efficient, the fact that it does have explosive growth, all these pros that we talked about. But let's talk a little bit about
Let's start with the Ferrari.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Ferrari. I mean, let's start with the Ripper right off the gate.
Which, to be real fair, not my favorite. Not my favorite.
Not mine either. But anyway, the people who do it well
do it really, really well. So Ruck will all the way from insulation to cultivation, believe it or not. I mean,
there's a reason it looks like the pink insulation in your wall, and they just change the color because it is. But when you think about it, what is fiberglass? It's spun glass. Yeah, spun glass.
So, I mean, this stuff started off way far from the garden. But again, you want to talk about true hydro, soil was not even in the ballpark, right? Yep. It was actually developed in the 1930s in Denmark, those bright Danish folks then. And it was originally used as a thermal and acoustic insulation, believe it or not. But by the 1970s, those wily Dutch horticulturalists discovered it as a useful substrate for hydroponics.
Always the Dutch.
And really it pretty quickly, from what I understand, gained favor in widespread favor in, commercial greenhouse cultivation, for a lot of the things that we were talking about. You got to understand that believe it or not, even being such a tiny a country as the Netherlands is, which even smaller state, if you will, the Netherlands is Holland. That's the second largest food growing producing region and food exporting region of the world, second to the U.S.
When you look at it on the map, though, you just see miles, tens of miles.
Oh, dude, it's I mean, pull in, but it's pretty wild. What's the crap even made of, Gabe?
So it's made by basically melting basalt rock and spinning it into fibers. Again, very much like insulation. Rockwool cubes and slabs. They've pretty much become the standard in tomato, pepper growing, and cannabis farming for years. Yep. One of the things people like about it, it's a 7.0 pH. It's completely inert. It just does what you want it to do. And the nice part about it is it's clean. It's easy. There's no, that was
and
one
you
of the
throw in trash bags and stuff like that.
That was one of the things I kind of wanted to kind of highlight with any of these methods is like how, when it comes to really trying to have a lab grade facility, that's one of the things. And by the way, if you're having problems with the green algae, I know a lot of people have problems with that. You can either get those Floraflex caps, or you could use some zero tol from our friends at BioSafe. That will also help with the green slime on the top. But, the reality is, it is a nice, consistent media. I actually use it as my preferred method for cloning.
And why is that? Because it holds a lot of water, right?
Not just that, because it's consistent. Because I know, in fact, now that you mentioned that, one of the things I know we can do, because it comes as a dry product, is you can actually take them. The method I have, I squeeze them out, I weigh it in the tray. So it's the same every time, 2,900 grams for a cube in every other slot, just in case you're wondering. but it's the type of thing where, just like you said, I can cut my clones, I can weigh that tray, and then every day after that, I can weigh it, and I will know exactly how much water I've lost. So
it's funny
really
because
predictable.
People have that, like the Ruck will pinch. So it's like, bro, you can't do it too much. It's like you got to get a little bit of a pinch and a light shake.
It's funny you say that, because I worked at a place for a while, and the guys would like squeeze out the fucking cubes.
Can't do that.
And I'm like, no, stop doing that.
Yeah, you literally,
because then there's if you'll notice, they're actually directional. So when you crush them, you're actually like breaking up that capillary action. And when it comes back, there's actually bigger pockets in there. So it's like they design it to be a certain way. I actually really like the way a clone slides into it, like the way I don't use the factory hole. I kind of go. That's
the thing. You have two groups of people: the ones that use
the factory hole, and those that don't.
Factory hole.
I don't like it because if the stem's not big enough,
we edit that.
It's a very sensual episode.
It's plants, bro.
I don't like it because if the stem's not big enough to fill it, right, and all of a sudden it's going to get air down there.
Yeah. No, I've definitely.
Oh my God, catastrophic.
I will say, just going back to, just listing out the rest of the pros. So obviously, again, same thing, right? It's a sterile environment. It's the fact that it really does have, a very good, excellent air to water ratio if you don't squeeze the water out, right? But I also do feel like pro tip. But I also do feel like everybody that I've ever seen that does good with it does have like a lot, like, and it was the same thing I used to kind of do in plugs. I would like shake out like the wrapper plugs a little bit. It's like I would soak them, but then I would give them a little bit of a squeeze. So anyway, great air to water ratio, supports rapid root development and very rapid growth. That's why people really like it. And again, especially for rooting, it does seem to be an excellent environment for rooting. The one thing that I don't like about it is if I'm going from that to cocoa, sometimes I've just had it right there when it's trying to roots get out of the rock wool into the cocoa, a weird layer there.
So, and it can be a bit hydrophobic.
There's a word for you. Phobic, doesn't like.
Yeah, and I've seen it. Well, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it where it'll suck the moisture out of the cocoa. I've seen where the cocoa will suck the moisture out of it. Right. So you just need to be, when you do that transplant. I actually usually like to just splash the cube, and not for nothing. I do like there to be a pretty generous root ball when I am transplanting. Well, I don't like it just to be like one or two roots. One
other thing too I would mention as a pro is capillary action. That's one of the reasons you can do it in these flood and drain and ebb and grow systems, right? Because you can actually flood the bottom of it, and it is going to pull up in a proper way and leave that proper amount of air, right? Because the roots do need air. That's the other end of photosynthesis is obviously respiration, right? Yep. So that's one of the reasons why a terrarium works, because actually the roots and stem and leaf tissue are using opposite things, right? Yep. So the leaves are giving off oxygen and taking in CO2, and the roots are actually doing the opposite. They're taking in oxygen and giving off CO2. Again, that's why a terrarium works. Look it up, folks. Anyway, as far as cons, and my biggest beef is the non-biodegradable aspect. Yep. As far as I know, there were only, and maybe they're not even in operation anymore, like 2 different recycling plants in all of the U.S. Because again, this did become favored not just in cannabis, but in Tomatoes, big greenhouse production. Yep. So you just see piles and piles of shit, which I absolutely hate it. So there's really no environmental aspect.
That's the reason I only use the plugs, and not for nothing.
Minimizing it. I like
most of the time, my plants get big enough that they've just grown out of that plug. So there's really not even much left of it by the time.
Well, it's like we saw in Holland, literally, even though they were 8x8 plugs, it was a freaking stem. Like
so, I mean, the other thing too is it does require pH adjustment before use. Most people, I'm not sure if you know this, but all cubes that you get are at a 7.0. So you are going to want to soak it for about, I would say an hour or so. Now, one thing This is a little tidbit for the people who don't know. One thing is, you take 50 cubes and you put it in a bucket that's at 5.7, 5.2, 5 whatever, and you forget about it overnight. Guess what? You're going to come in the morning, and what do you think the water pH is going to be on it? It's actually going to be at 7.0. So at that point, the cubes will then pH the water. So again, it's something you really want to, you don't like, if you leave it overnight, do it again. Do it again. Do it again. Pro tip.
Pro tip. Also, I don't like it. It's just like if anybody that's thrown insulation in their attic, it's scratchy. It's weird. I don't think it's great for handling for the employees. Obviously, it does drive like a Ferrari. It's right on the edge. That's one of the great things about it.
Crash and burn, baby. Crash and burn.
You burning. So if you actually get, and let's say have any kind of issues with your drip and the water level dries out quickly in there, your EC level is going to spike massively and burn the shite out of your plants.
It can be temperamental once you let it dry out. Like if you let it get really dry,
you're not getting it back again. Just like we talked about,
it will not act the same way it did.
You've done like it's not. It's literally. I hate to say, but a lot of times for those plants, it's over. What you have to hit rock wool from beginning to end. Like I mean, I know, like shout out to your boy Dread. You know what I mean? We've been watching those fucking. You know what I mean? And but
God bless him.
He's there on Saturdays. He's there on Sundays. You know what I mean? Unless there's a pretty light show, boy, he is there.
You are not wrong there, dude.
All right.
That.
So obviously, it is very much for precision-driven indoor folks. Really, the crop steering, big-time crop steering people. This is where we see a lot of it. This is where we kind of saw crop steering come out of, and then also obviously greenhouse hydro systems.
I'll be honest with you too. Back in the day, a lot of the OG cushes. You'd see a lot of guys. What do you do to dance over there?
Yeah, I know. Well, it also reminds me of like when Chet talks about like back in the day, like
you'd have a 4x4 with like 64 plants in it. They do the root and flip. In which when they would do the root and flip, they do it in like a 6-inch block, 8-inch block, and they would just, again, 4x4, 64 plants, bang. And I'll be honest with you, I thought, we talk about terroir, and it's funny because on the Sour Family Farms episode that just dropped a couple weeks ago, Mike and I talked about it after the show, but he even was saying how, we talk about how diesel is different because we're not using GH anymore. Sure. And he went as far to go as the Pro Mix was different in the mid 2000s. I mean, here's like the ingredients they were using in General Hydro 100% was different. And when you really, and we talk about terroir as kind of an exclusively outdoor thing. It's an indoor thing. And realistically, again, depending on the coconuts, depending on the peat, depending on the year, depending on all these things.
That rabbit hole is deep, and we don't want to keep you here all day, folks. So let's talk a little bit about NFT, which is nutrient film technique. We'll pick it up here and try and kind of start hitting through some of these, but because there is going to be some of the similar stuff through them, right? NFT, it's a hydro method that's used in growing cannabis, and for the matter, other plants. Obviously, all these things came from something else before people adopted them to cannabis, but it's definitely not using soil. You'll see these tube systems or these channels, right? And it's basically, plants hanging in baskets with a nutrient film, which is essentially a thin bit of water that's running down them. You do have a pump that's going to run things up
similar
top.
Similar to what we saw in Holland with the tomatoes.
Yep, exactly. It's known for its simplicity. This is something that's been around forever. You're talking one plant and a little bit of a basic 1% to 2% drop, and you can get this stuff all over the place. Known for simplicity, known for efficiency, fast growth rates like any other hydro. But specifically here is how, NFT works for cannabis cultivation. Number one, obviously structurally, cannabis plants are placed in net pots or grow cups like we were talking about, and then sitting there in a channel. The roots just dangle down in that shallow stream. It's a shallow stream because you wouldn't want to have a whole thick stream going through there, like let's say DWC.
Then you get root rot.
You get root rot and everything else.
Fusarium, Pythium.
Just like we talked about, you need that oxygen in the roots still, right? Whether there is, it's in a true substrate or not, still needs oxygen to the roots, right? So as far as water nutrients, It's very similar to what a lot of us see. It is a recirculating system. The nutrients are going to be right there in the reservoir. Pump is going to continually circulate it. It's going to be at a pretty low EC typically, because a lot of these things, it's like lettuce and stuff, really fast growing plants, which again is one of the reasons that, thank you, GRAMBO, which is one of the reasons that, you do have cannabis on. And again, especially when it was true black market, the quicker people could get stuff up, out, and done, especially like the cut and flip method. This is a cut and flip method type usage, right? Could you move that up a little bit there, GRAMBO? Let's see. Obviously you're going to want to oxygenate, say that 3 times fast, the water. And that's because roots are exposed to air. It does provide excellent aeration. The system does, which that's one of the things that helps promote that rapid growth. And again, you do see it. I mean, really where I saw it mostly originally was with like, lettuce, leafy green type production. The obvious pro is, Gabe,
fast growth with abundant oxygen. Right. I mean, that's really the reason that you do almost any of these systems is because you're trying to save time.
And very direct nutrient uptake. So you're not having to run a super high EC. So low EC, closed loop, lot of it, super efficient use of water and nutrients, closed loop system. Really in a lot of ways, plug and play. As far as really some of the cons, I would say,
GRAMBO, give that a slide. Give that a little slizzy slide.
Oh, it is. Here's the other thing I would say before as far as con is it's cheap. It's an inexpensive system.
Yeah. Once it's built.
Well, and really even it can be built out of
PVC.
And you could like if you're walking around a farm or something like that, like you can find, or even just a general junkyard of sorts, you can typically, aside from getting a good pump, you can find the channels, you can adapt things. So I would say one of the other pros is it's a super adaptable and it's cheap system, and especially after you've built it, it's like really, really cheap to run.
Yeah, I mean, some of the cons are it's not very forgiving. Any interruption in nutrient flow, intake can really kind of stress it and kill it, just because there's not, again, like I was saying a couple of minutes ago, the bigger your root mass, the more of an insurance policy you have. So God forbid you have a problem, those things get dehydrated. They're not going to bounce back because they don't have that.
Well, and these suckers are going to die real quick.
Yeah, and the roots will just,
because that's all it's living on.
Any of that media is going to provide a cushion for that, you can see root clogging or biofilm buildup in the channels that can cause problems. Obviously, again, you want to keep your water at a certain temperature. If you have pumps and stuff that are making that water flow, those pumps can heat up. So you definitely want to make sure you have some type of chiller in line, because realistically, anything above 72 degrees, I like to live in the 68 degree range personally.
Me too.
But anything above 72 degrees, you can really possibly experience some problems. And we'll actually cover that a little bit more on the DWC segment. But it also requires very specific pH and EC, and like Jerin was saying, you're not running it super high because there's really just not a lot of that buffer in the media. So,
well, and that's the one thing I do mention about having media. Once you get media, there is buffering for the pH and the EC. Until then, so any of these that have no media, truly no media, you're on that razor edge,
And don't get me wrong, you can do some really cool shit. It's great to see that vigorous growth, but you're driving a Ferrari. Sometimes on a wet day, it's easy to put it in the fucking wall.
And just, again, just for anybody that does care, it is, typically on that 1 to 3% slope. I've always, in school, we always talked about 2%.
Yep.
It's similar to, I guess that's similar to kind of grade that you'd have on concrete, right? Just flow grade, Also, you want to ensure backup power, if at all possible, and have extra stuff around. These are typically cheap, little easy pumps.
It's easy enough.
If it blows out, take one out, put another one in, don't allow for those interruptions. And because when you do get interruptions in these type of systems, it's not going to come back, as we said. And then obviously, always be taking a look at the roots. Are they nice and white? Are they healthy? A lot of times people don't like to put organics through there because you do end up with the biofilms and things like that. And also sometimes they'll stain your roots brown, which like, let's say you put the mag through there or something, like could be a little confusing because,
some people might not agree with what I'm about to say, but, in my aqua farm buckets, you'd have it so root mass that it would literally be, going up that air hose.
Yeah.
We would just come in and we'd rip the roots right off and toss them in the trash. And, 2 weeks later,
here's the thing. I actually don't see anything overly wrong with that. As long as it has, as long as it has a real mass beyond that, hell yeah, rip that stuff off.
And I mean, it was filling the 3.5 gallon bucket. You were just cutting the excess roots. In which, I'll be honest with you, a lot of what I saw from that too was I didn't like them hanging down in there because of possible root problems.
Yeah, of course. Let's
talking to DWC, because that's one that I'll be honest with you, I get a lot of questions through.
People are still rocking.
Again, we were saying at the beginning of the show, we'd like you to answer those questions. Well, we get a lot of questions about DWC. Jerin, what the fuck is DWC?
Well, first off, it is deep water culture, right? We always like to, for whatever reason in this business, we like to shorten everything, but DWC is deep water culture. And, a lot of people look at it as one of the purest forms of hydroponics. In part because I just, again, it is truly soilless, but it is, I think, allows a system to, especially in our world, you can actually start growing bigger plants now, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Plus,
when numbers were a big thing for people, the biggest plant you can grow with
that was better, right?
Yeah.
And really, I think one of the things that made it so interesting for people, it has the illustrious reputation of actually being developed by NASA in the 1990s, right? So, we always heard about, or at least I did. I remember. I'm sure you heard this too, but GH was, used for hydro.
Yeah, but that's back when Neil was with him.
Yeah.
That's back when Neil was with him.
Let's be clear.
Shout out to Neil.
But NASA was one of the engineering partners. They were looking to try and grow food in space. How can we do that? That's when people started really looking at these simplistic, oxygen-rich, fast-growing systems that could be built from little to nothing that were, you got it. You guessed it.
A 27-gallon tub and some net pots, a little sprayer.
Woo! But again, these things that were easy to grow with cheap materials, that were easy to run, that were efficient to run, that took very little water. That's why you saw this kind of proliferation of this type of technology, really in that time. In the 90s, and it really started, I saw DWC pick up hard in the 2000s and really even to like 2005, 2008, 2010, 12.
Bro, I got a buddy here in town. I won't shout him out, but he knows who he is. But he runs DWC, and
there's
then
he's got
a double ended, but it's like a cool double ended. It's like a ducted double ended, and I'm familiar with it. I think he runs like 16 plants in a scrog in the entire room. It's 8. I think I want to say it's 8-10 lights, and like he absolutely murders it.
I know that Josh did pull up the graphic, which thank you for doing that. But real simply, it's just plants suspended in net pots. The roots are going to hang directly into a nutrient solution, but it's going to be constantly moving. So typically and fairly aggressively in a lot of these, like the undercurrent systems, that like took it and like was like, okay, we're going to take this concept and start blasting water down that tube, right? And they also had much bigger tubes, so had a lot of issues with blockage and stuff. They kind of took that concept and took it up, but really the same basic concept as NFT. It's just more room for growth, more room for roots, bigger plant ability, but all the same kind of, it's all the same kind of pros, believe it or not. Efficient water usage, rapid growth, and then obviously with this, roots get a little more direct access to some of these things. It's not just that little film of water on the bottom. You have more roots that are in there, but again, a much bigger root mass. There's less weights, but these definitely take more food. You know what I mean? Bigger plant, more food. So, you know what I mean? But I would still consider it to be a pro as far as like water usage and nutrient usage as compared to either cocoa or soil, of course. What issues might arise from that?
Again, same thing. You got to be really on that water temperature.
Water temperature.
You got to be on the EC. You got to be on the pH. Again, like I mentioned earlier, one of the nice things is you see some problems, you just flip it, flush it, and reset. So that's definitely a big thing. Power outages,
same stuff again, right?
That's honestly one of the reasons I've never gone to the clone generator. Is purely because you get a power outage. You get an hour or two, and your shit's cooked. You might have lost something you really liked, and then finally, me personally, I like to grow big plants.
Right.
And really not that well suited for growing big plants.
Well, and it can get out of control. Unfortunately, it does really well for big plants.
Yeah.
It can just get out of control.
And big plants are heavy.
Big plants are real heavy
if you're doing it right.
Yeah. So really, you'd want to be prepared with a good trellis system, something like that to be prepared for that. But it's funny because again, I would put the large plants as like a pro and con too, right? It's going to go, but if you're not prepared for that, and I think that pro is going to become a con real fast.
I think it's fun. I think if you do really, if you're really good at it, it can be really advantageous. I will say, my buddy that I was just talking about, he's done a lot of rounds in the place that he's at. He did just have a round where he had some type of bacterial issue, whatever.
And things went south quick.
And because everything's interconnected, it did go south pretty fast. He did have to pretty much scrap that.
And that's one of the reasons we do still consider it, even though I know there are people, and please don't get at us, I don't consider it to be that great of an option for commercial production. That's why you still see it mostly with small indoors.
Yeah.
And then,
but if you're good at it and it works for you, I'm not going to shit on the way.
No, God, no. And dude, it's a tinkering thing. Some of these really high efficiency, high output growers, some of these guys are still truly putting weight on the market. Yeah. This is still a pretty badass system.
We were gonna give an honorable mention in there just for aquaponics. I don't think it's anything that.
But that would have made it 7, and we needed 6.
And
and we're already deep into this.
We're already deep into this episode. But aquaponics is a cool way that people do things. It involves
and even aeroponics for that matter as well. I wanted to put these are kind of 2 honorable mentions. But GRAMBO, if you could kind of swing us through here, and if anybody does have really interested in aquaponics, keep going down, bud. We're just going to skip through this section. We can definitely do a whole show on it. We just realized pretty quickly, like, oh man, this is definitely a lot. And
our boy Aquaponics Steve over there at the Growing with Fishes.
He really knows this stuff.
Yes. So if you're interested in growing with fishes, go listen to the Growing with Fish podcast.
Thank you, GRAMBO. That was actually perfect. That takes a lot of
GRAMBO. You are solid.
I get around, baby.
So the next one that we really, and this is a personal favorite of mine, especially on a commercial scale. It's gonna be Coco Core. Ironically enough,
hey everybody. Didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but did want to remind you that anything we talk about that are our products, you can find at jugdealers.shop 24/7 online. Go and get it. Support us. Help us continue doing what we're doing. Jugdealers.shop. Thanks a bunch. Now back to the show.
It is our biggest episode was talking about
is about cocoa.
Yeah, a lot of cocoa growing.
One of the things that I did like absolutely hate about Rockwool, I love about cocoa, and the fact that it is. Although here's one thing I have to say about Rockwool. Kudos on them that they did take a byproduct and actually used it. It's just that they can't do anything else again afterwards. Same thing was done with Coco Core. This was a waste product that was then recognized at its of its usability as a substrate, in part because peat moss was becoming much more scarce, right? Because it's out of these bogs. Peat moss,
300-year-old bogs. It takes some time.
Takes some time, right? So people realized actually, hey, this is viable, and it was like essentially a throwaway from palm oil, I believe, right? It was one of the places. And maybe even the main area, right?
Coconut oil.
So Coconut Core specifically comes from, and we do kind of consider it passive hydroponics or drain to waste hydroponics, right? Although you can do ebb and grow, you can do flood and drain, you can do drip, you can do hand water.
Especially with the blocks nowadays,
baby,
and
especially with the blocks.
For those of you who haven't seen them, we do have the Scietetics 6-inch and 8-inch compressed
which is
block,
pure, or the 70-30. 6 inches pure, 70-30 is some.
Most of them, they're buffered with a cal nitrate. Ours actually goes through a 2 to 3 year composting process.
Yes, sir.
Which, I'll be honest with you, when you charge these things, for any of you guys who've used these things, I'm just going to go full plug style here.
Plug it.
But for any of you who have used any of these cocoa blocks, you'll notice that when you first hydrate them, as the first water comes out, it is gross and just nasty, and you're running it for a couple minutes to really get that crap out of there. The first time I charged ours, Lee told me to do a very specific number, and I was like, let me just run it out and run it through. And as the water, you get that buildup, and then it's just like, it just kind of flows out.
Sure.
It was clear.
Spans like magic.
It was crystal clear, and that was the first thing.
That's an indicator right there.
And I was, and look, It's a little bit different than some of the other core. It doesn't dry out quite as quickly, so when I transplant, I give it just a little bit of charged water and kind of tease it into the bag.
Sure.
But the reality is these things are awesome. By all means, reach out. We'll get you some samples. These are definitely more of a commercial specific.
These are actually as well. Yeah. So for commercial people, we get you more than a couple of them, but on 2, maybe even actually 3, maybe on all 3 packages, the 8-inch blocks do come as part of that package. So check that out on the sample thing. But, as we were talking about, this is originally agricultural waste, which I love it when you take waste products and make it into something that can also then after that be composted, which I do love, right? Came into existence.
Yeah, stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Mr.
Ruck,
Guy who says everything is, bad for the earth that we do.
So in the 1980s, of course, growers, and this was specifically hydroponic growers. This was right because it was always food crop production that then cannabis production came in and emulated, right? So we're talking the 1980s. You started having tomato growers, pepper growers, a lot of these greenhouse producers using it. And specifically it was coming out of, you guessed it, where are palm trees? Where is a large palm oil? Sri Lanka. India, still is. And so they started processing into a grow medium. It quickly gained traction. And again, that was in part because it was an alternative to peat, because up to that point in greenhouses, it was all peat.
And this is a waste product from another industry.
Exactly. And again, if you really want to get into cocoa, check out our cocoa episode. I don't know
Push
what
it up to 100,000. Let's see
get
it. Come
to
on,
100. It actually really easy to find, because if you just go to our top looked at episodes, it's number 1. So today I dare to say that today cocoa is the top choice for cannabis cultivators. And that's white market, that's black market, that's home, that's commercial, that's really all of it. And it is that wonderful medium of, the meeting of the minds, the beautiful blend of hydroponics and soil growing. So you can use a lot of those same techniques, put it together and really get, a soil-like product with hydroponic control. And I think that's the ultimate thing there. So right there, that's a pro, right? Soil-like handling, hydroponic control. Again, we already said it. It's sustainable. It's biodegradable. There is a high water retention. I will say it's not impossible to overwater cocoa, but it is difficult. And
I mean, when you have roots, it's
hard because
it's borderline impossible.
Its air to water ratio is such that it has great drainage with high water retention.
You can keep it way more wet than you would a peat.
And in fact, let's give them our rule of thumb with cocoa versus soil, right? As far as watering goes, what I like to always say is, if you think it needs to be watered in cocoa, go ahead and water it. If you think it might need to be watered in soil, wait at least a day, maybe 2. Okay, so take that to heart, folks. It does encourage very healthy root development, in part because of that air to water holding ratio, and it is very compatible with both synthetic and organic feeding systems. And to be honest with you, it's that meeting of the mind itself. So I love getting the meeting of the minds as well. As a con, if it's not buffered and flushed properly, you will need to use a CalMag supplement. With ours, because it's properly composted, which gives it that high cation exchange capacity. It does not need to, and it is a natural buffering process. It doesn't need the CalMag, but in many brands, buffering is necessary to get that, basically to flush out that salt buildup, right? Because it is typically grown in a coastal environment. And it's definitely, no matter what, going to be in that part of the world. It can dry out quite quickly in warm environments. But again, water that. You're not wanting to try and take that to a real, because it's not as bad as Rockwool is. But if you dry out cocoa heavily too, guess what it's going to do in that? Same thing it does in Rockwool. It's going to spike the EC and you're going to burn plants, right? So this is best for hybrid growers looking for precision without full hydroponics. That's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
Easy money right there. People could say whatever the hell they want. I don't really care, because it produces great product and I'm not burning the planet to the ground.
I like it on both ends. So let's not take any time and get right into peat, which was truly the backbone of
for years.
Potting mixes. Funny little story, and it was before me, but a friend of mine who was a generation older got into horticulture school, and the first thing is because a professor says, we're going to talk a lot about pot plants. Pot plants is really the base of this industry. potted plants, but it's in horticulture. It's just, it's shortened down to pot plants, which I'm guessing now. And I have just made that must be where it came from, pot, because somebody probably just saw it growing in pots. God, we get places on this show. Sometimes it takes us an hour and 6 minutes.
My mom was a big smoker, and she always called it pot. And so anytime I hear pot, smoking that weed. The pot back in my day was better.
That's why they call it. It's probably they call it weed too. You know?
So as we mentioned before and alluded to, peat moss is harvested from wetland bogs in places like Ireland, in places like Canada, but it's technically renewable, but it takes more than our lifetime.
Hundreds and hundreds
of years. You know, its use in horticulture does go back to the 1800s in Europe. You do get that really good like white or white. It's not a sphagnum. Sphagnum is really the Canadian style, but even the playground that we had for a while, that playground Terra had some of that white Irish peat moss, which is quite interesting. But again, by the mid 20th century, we started having an understanding that this was essentially a finite resource for what we were doing, and wasn't the long-term solution for commercial potting soils. And peat does provide, it's pretty acidic. It's kind of weird. It can be very hydrophobic. If you let it get dried out, the water just runs to the edge. You almost have to really mix it with perlite or vermiculite to even get the water to go into it. But you can get a good balanced mix if you put the right stuff into it.
Yep.
As far as pros, what's your feeling?
It's great for water retention.
It definitely holds water.
Like if you think you need to water it, wait a day.
I mean, treat this like soil, folks. This ain't cocoa.
It's easy to find. It's easy.
Yeah.
You can find it at Home Depot, your local nursery store. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to go to the hydroponic specific store.
Yep. Because, especially in the early days.
For the beginners, hey man, this is easy. This is plant and go. And reality is pretty inexpensive, and it's pretty forgiving for you beginners as well. So.
And it is buffered, just so you know. There is usually it's a dolomitic limestone or something in there because it is acidic naturally to kind of balance that. So
and now
that definitely helps as well.
And they have all different kinds nowadays. Yeah. They get the Pro Mix HP.
Shout out to Sun 4. Back in the day, some good old sunshine. You know what I mean? That was the staple. But as far as cons, like we said, it's not really technically sustainable.
Nah.
Bogs do take centuries to regenerate. It can compact heavily over time. It can become waterlogged pretty easily over time. It's definitely one. I hate to say it. I don't want to say it's good for the lazy grower because but it's almost like you need it for the grower that forgets about it. You know what I mean? Like, because it needs to dry out. It's a lot like soil, maybe even worse in some ways. And again, it does need some of those amendments for pH judgments. That was the dolomitic limestone, like I mentioned. And you do want to aerate it so it becomes less hydrophobic. It becomes more hydrophilic and actually can pull in, for low budget folks, though, for home hobbyists, for traditionalists, the people that have just done it forever. This is a great media for you.
30 years ago, it's how I got my start. So,
I mean, and then certainly, not, the original OG substrate.
Not to be forgotten, because it is ever so gaining popularity nowadays.
That's true. That's true. So we're only mentioning it last because we kind of went forwards to backwards.
Yes,
if you
definitely
think about
not least.
Not least.
Definitely
not least. But we're going to talk a little bit about living soil, and it is making a real comeback. At first there was no living soil. It was the only way that cannabis was grown. There was no thought. There was no
the heady boys. If it's another buzzword I can throw into my rosin.
And like really talking about living soil being ancient. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, like tierra preta, which is that Amazon soil, right? Which is like an ancient composting technique that they're not even quite sure exactly how the heck they were doing that. Look that stuff up, guys.
They're not even sure how they were doing it.
Graham Hancock, also Dr. Chris Fisher, he's my neighbor out of CSU, has done a lot of the LiDAR stuff and mapping in the Amazon and proving that the Amazon may have been actually like out of control horticulture, and that this whole kind of slash and burn thought process that we've been really teaching is may really not be truly the whole story. But this tierra preta is essentially a soil conditioner.
Just by the look of it, it looks healthy.
Look at that, dude.
We talked about where potash comes from, the ash.
Yep. So I like to mention this because living soil truly is ancient, literally, right? These methods, they're mimicking, what's going to naturally happen in a natural ecosystem, right? Where you have things that are consumed consumed, and then different microorganisms working together, and all these symbiotic relationships, and worms and mycorrhiza and all this organic matter,
all the stuff that we talk about when we tell you not to put that goddamn hypochlorous in your water.
That's right. And what is it really? What is it? It's the food web. It's the food web.
Yes.
And I don't believe that Jeff Lowenfels, I don't think he coined that term, although he may have. If he did, I'm sorry, Jeff. But if you really want to go and talk about the food web and really look at what that means, on a whole level, he does a great job breaking that down. But again, while this term living soil gained popularity in the 2010s, and that's also when organic farming was coming in and all these things. But then
farm to table.
But then that's also when the word organic started getting bastardized and taken out of the chemistry world and into these other worlds.
What does organic mean again?
Carbon based or not carbon based. That's right. You guys are going to hear me say that over and over. These principles trace back, to indigenous and regenerative farming techniques used for thousands of years. Interestingly enough, I was just in a situation where you had people that were living for thousands of years and had to have this small valley that was not exactly a place you would consider to be conducive to live and farm and
so it just means organic. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're using non-animal based products.
No, it doesn't mean any of that.
I'm just,
No, totally. That's the thing. And
that would be vegan.
Now here's what's even funnier, right? How do plants take up nutrients? They take it up in an inorganic plant available form. So what has to happen is when an organic nutrient gets put in, like let's say manure or something, it's got to lose that carbon, and it's got to do that over a process.
Are we sciencing?
Are we sciencing here?
A little bit of sciencing.
Anyway.
Well, it's funny because, I was telling someone about, like NH4, and I'm like, and the
ammonium.
The plant's got to lose the 4 H's before it can actually hang out with the end.
There's some things that got to happen there, right? So obviously one of the big pros, no bottled nutrients, you're doing these things to feed the soil, to feed the plant.
But you need to know the timing. Like it's not difficult. When you're putting it in,
that's difficult.
You need to understand that this is not available today, not this moment.
Yes. And in fact, even like in a raised bed situation, in a lot of ways, you're better off putting those dry amendments in the fall before everything freezes over than you put things in the spring. Now, if you put them in every spring, well, you're probably actually getting the stuff from last spring, even while you're putting the stuff in this spring. But again, if you're doing it every spring, like it kind of operates in the same way, right?
What about like tilling any of the waste in there? Would you recommend that? Like when you harvest, kind of.
I mean, reality is I see no problem with that. Now, what I don't like doing in general is tilling, just because that's taking and really breaking up all the mycorrhizal associations that are in there and all the networks. But what it also does is it takes, specifically tilling, it takes weed seeds that are not germinating right now, that are like, 8 or 12 inches below the soil, that aren't getting any light and that aren't getting any nutrients and aren't getting any moisture to get them to germinate. Now we're putting them right on top.
Right.
And now I guess how they want to germinate.
I was more thinking of the diamond mine style where he's got the little, you've seen how he does it. I forget what it's called, but
that was my first introduction to living soil. I heard it called
like that deep.
That's not bad.
I heard it's called no-till. Everyone's like, "Oh, I grow no-till." I was like, "What the hell is no-till?"
Well, and I do. I mean, it's specifically this is my veggie garden, but I just use like a little spin. One of those little spin,
the garden weasel.
Yeah. Much like
he's out here playing with his devil sticks.
But yes, there is, the reality is there's some timing that you need to know, especially if you're talking about in cannabis production. To me, when it comes to veggie production, I'm always just like, put a bunch of organic shit in there, put some manure in there,
fire in the hole,
fire in the hole, baby. Let her rip, tater chip. I do believe that well done living soil can promote terpene and cannabinoid richness. However, I will say that really well done Synganics, I think you're hard pressed to not be able to get those same things. So anyway, and then it is self-regenerating with that kind of proper care, which again, I do like that.
Once you buy it, then as long as you don't have any issues, you're constantly
keeping its environmental sustainability high, which always gets a nice tick in our book.
But look, it requires patience. Because if you're coming from the world of hydroponics, it grows a lot slower.
Yes, it does.
Nutrient deficiencies, they can be harder to fix. they can be harder to kind of
or / impossible in an annual plant's lifetime.
Yep.
Again, that goes back to our take good notes.
It can be bulky and harder to scale indoors.
Yep.
As you can see, our friend, the Diamond Mine, he's had those beds going for 60 cycles now, so over 10 years. But again, those beds, they're not going anywhere.
No, and so
there.
Not saying it's not doable, but yeah.
And then realistically, that soil needs time to cook and mature before you're going to be planting.
Which is why it's going to be best for outdoor connoisseurs, regenerative growers, and really flavor focused connoisseurs. There's no doubt about it. Again, all these 6 different methods, there's not a one that's better than the other. We just wanted to kind of display how there is those differences. There is those, here's the buffering spots of it. Here's the spots where you're going to see where it's easier. Here's the spots where you can really put, the foot on the gas. So I hope
running back through it, how does a person figure out what's best for them? Reality is hydroponics and DWC, that's going to be best for you chasing yield, chasing speed, chasing precision, knowing, hey, this is what it needs every day, every time.
And typically not for the beginner.
No. Like we said, for the guy who's comfortable drifting a Ferrari through the turns. Coco Core, which is ideal balance between, hydroponics and organics, so control and ease. It's the best of both worlds. That's really, again, that's the one we kind of like. That's the one we
I think it's funny that a lot of people would say, oh, of course, soil start with. I think, dare I say it, that cocoa is actually better for people learning because they can water it.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be hard to overwater that thing. And the biggest thing that people do is overwater peat and soil, right? Peat-based mixes, they're old school. They're simple. They're legit. They're great for learning the ropes too, especially for somebody that is more of a set it and forget it type. If you're not the tinkering type, maybe that's a great.
And by the way, I want to just say to anyone out there, don't be afraid to run cocoa outside.
Oh God, no! Please do.
I think a lot of people, I can't run cocoa outside.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Rock will. Point blank, man, it's for the sterile environment. It is, for a lot of these GMP, type facilities you're going to see more and more around the world. That's one of the reasons you're not going to see Rockwell go away anytime soon. In those very dialed in environments, those super hardcore plant steering environments, you're going to continue to see Rockwell. And kudos to the guys that are out there that nail it. And then Living Soil, man. You know what? These are for the guys that are just wanting to let it happen, and appreciate the process and appreciate the process of the living soil web and the soil food web and whatever it can give to the plant. So at the end of the day, man, there ain't no one size fits all.
There's no one size fits all. It's whatever you're comfortable with. It's whatever you want to learn, whatever. And I think you're going to realize too, certain cultivar like being grown certain ways, so it's your job as a steward to the plant to figure out what works best for not only you, but for the plant, and again, who's controlling who? So if you think about it like that too, like blend your lifestyles together so you can really get the best product, right? And again, if ultimately, I truly believe if you respect the plant, she will give you the respect back. She'll give you the love back. And I will give you this. The last thing well, first off, I know we didn't get to any of the Grand Canyon stuff, but next episode we'll put it out there, I promise. But last but not least, there's no right way to do this. There's many ways to skin the cat, but there are wrong ways to do it. So, yeah. And I don't have those specifics for you, or at least not today. Thank you guys so much for coming and tuning in. I know the episode went on for a while, but you know what? I really enjoyed this. Yeah, we had a lot to talk about. And it comes from a place of experience.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you guys so much for coming by and listening to our 6 different grow techniques explained here by the Jug Dealers from the Jug Den. Until next time, peace out, guys.
Peace.